A beginning is a very delicate time.
When I finished watching the 1984 adaptation of Dune, I immediately hated it. I thought it was badly paced with cringy dialogue, and to top off the shit sundae, characters who I loved in the book had no development in the movie. But while those criticisms might have some bite, in the process of writing this review, I've kind of convinced myself that I actually liked the movie. And depending on your relationship to Dune, so might you. Allow me to explain. My expectations going into this film were kind of wobbly to begin with. It seemed that people unfamiliar with the book tended to hate the movie, while Dune mega nerds kinda had a soft spot for it. Personally, I read Dune back in high school and I thought it was alright. I could see why it was so influential and lauded, but it just wasn't my favorite. It's an epic hero's journey that deals with themes of climate change and the effects of capitalism/imperialism on indigenous populations. The scope of the book is just massive. It would be an understatement to say that it's not an easily adaptable book. So, in other words, getting it wrong seemed more likely than getting it right. There was a lot of potential in this movie. Certain segments of the film would have been perfect if not for some minor but glaring issues. So overall, despite my initial misgivings, I have an immense sense of respect for what the film does manage to accomplish, especially considering the technical restraints of the time period it was made in. Before we get any further, I just want to say that if you like this video and you would like to see more science fiction, fantasy, book, and occasional movie reviews, please consider subscribing to my channel and leaving a comment so I know that there's a real human being behind the screen. Enjoy the rest of the video. The 1984 Dune begins with a meeting between the Emperor Padishah and a posse of Space Guild representatives. I love this scene. Not only does it establish the main conflict between the House Harkonnen and the House Atreides, it's also unapologetically weird. From the creepy close-ups of the Space Guild emissary to the bald Bene Gesserit character design, Lynch unabashedly embraces the absurdity of Dune. This is a world set thousands of years into the future. It only makes sense that it's completely and utterly unfamiliar. We spend the next hour and a half switching back and forth between the Atreides and the Harkonnens, waiting for the ball to drop. We already know from the first scene that the Atreides will be betrayed. The focus is instead on laying the foundations for Paul's character. Kyle MacLachlan is a highlight of the film in general, but I particularly enjoyed his performance in this first bit. I was a little skeptical of him because I had only seen him in Twin Peaks before this, and he's really great in that show, but the role is completely different.
This is, excuse me, a damn fine cup of coffee.
So I wasn't sure if he would be able to portray the boyish assurity that defines Paul in the beginning of his journey, but he absolutely pulls it off. MacLachlan really elevates the film as a whole with his performance. Unfortunately, the latter half of the movie is where my biggest issues with it lie, and they're somewhat unforgivable. The Fremen are the most interesting aspect of Dune, in my opinion, and everything balances on Paul's relationship with them. But for some reason, the Fremen plot points are completely rushed through. Paul meets Chani in one scene, and literally the next time we see them together, he's declaring his love for her and they're making out. Chani wasn't super well developed in the books to begin with, but she at least had a defined personality and an important role in bridging the gap between the Fremen and Paul. In the film, the Fremen immediately accept Paul as one of their own after just one awkward scene. Paul never has to prove himself as a chosen one in their prophecies, which steals all the tension out of the second half of the film. Moreover, in the books you get the sense that the Fremen are these incredible warriors, and Herbert really takes his time in fleshing out their culture. Like I said before, the Fremen are what make Dune, Dune. It's a shame that the film spends so much time showing Baron Harkonnen flying around just being fucking weird, but doesn't give the same attention to the Fremen. They come off as this monolithic race of desert people, but they're so much more than that. I will say that some of the visuals during our time in Arrakis are really gorgeous, especially all of the scenes with the worms. Most of the effects in the movie range from cringy like the Roblox shields to alright for the time like the spaceships and everything else. But the worms in particular looked huge and terrifying, and they were surprisingly realistic. It's impressive that they were able to make them so lifelike with the limited technology of the 80s. In terms of character development, aside from Paul, there is none. I already mentioned Chani as a victim of this, but Jessica was someone I thought was criminally underutilized. In the book, she's one of the most fascinating characters, and she's instrumental in advising Paul about the nuances of politics. In the film, she basically only exists to give birth to Paul's sister. Duncan Idaho, another great character in the book, is in a grand total of 2 scenes and he dies in the second scene. Gurney Halleck, played by the legendary Patrick Stewart, is also just kinda there. Princess Irulan does some narration in the film, which was a nice nod to the epigraphs in the book, but she has no actual speaking lines in the movie. I know who she is because I had already read the book, but someone who didn't wouldn't have a clue as to why she's so important. There was just so much untapped potential here. I understand that there was studio interference with the movie, and it just makes me so angry because having seen Twin Peaks, I know that David Lynch is very capable of directing a large ensemble cast. My final quibble with the film has to do with the dialogue, specifically the use of inner voices. I think it's meant to be a nod to the book because of the third-person omniscient narrator, but the thing is, in a movie, the camera itself operates like a third-person omniscient narrator, so there was really no need for inner voices. So many scenes feature this device, and not only did it interrupt the flow of the dialogue, it was redundant. The inner voices didn't tell the audience anything they couldn't have already figured out from the actors' expressions, but that might just be more of a personal pet peeve than a true fault of the film. Having seen the theatrical cut, I really want to watch all the fan edits and maybe even the super long 4-hour director's cut because I feel like it might address a lot of the issues I had with the theatrical cut. I'm so glad I watched the theatrical cut, and it gave me a greater sense of appreciation for how great the source material was. And it goes without saying, but I'm super excited for Denis Villeneuve's take on the world to come out later this year. With the upgraded technology, I'm really hoping for some striking visuals to do justice to the world of Dune, and I know from previous films like Arrival that Villeneuve is more than capable of creating very compelling human conflict. So that's my review of the 1984 Dune. I've never really done a movie review, so let me know what you think of it in the comments. If you've seen the movie, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well. Thanks for watching.